Millionaire sees his ex-wife after 3 years on a plane with twins who look just like him. The hum of the jet engines filled the cabin as Adrian settled into his first-class seat, adjusting the collar of his tailored suit. It had been a long day of meetings in New York, and now he was finally heading back home to Los Angeles. He glanced out the window at the tarmac below, watching ground crew scurry about under the floodlights. The plane began to taxi, its gentle vibrations lulling him into a state of weary relaxation. As the flight attendants made their final checks, Adrian reached for the complimentary bottle of water on his tray table. That's when he saw her, walking down the aisle with 2 small children in tow. His breath caught in his throat as recognition hit him like a freight train. There she was, Evelyn, his ex-wife, looking just as beautiful as he remembered, though perhaps a bit more tired around the eyes. But it wasn't just her presence that stopped his heart. It was the twins clinging to her hands, miniature versions of himself staring back with wide, curious eyes. Adrian's mind raced as memories flooded back from 3 years ago. Their bitter divorce proceedings, the arguments over assets and properties, but most painfully, the fight over something neither of them had possessed: children. They'd tried for years without success during their marriage, and doctors had told them it was unlikely they'd ever conceive naturally. Yet here she was, with 2 perfect little humans who bore an uncanny resemblance to him. The same piercing blue eyes, the distinctive dimple on their left cheeks when they smiled, even the way they tilted their heads slightly to one side when observing something new. Evelyn hadn't noticed him yet. She was focused on helping the twins find their seats in economy class several rows behind his position. Adrian watched as she expertly navigated the narrow aisle, her movements graceful despite the challenge of managing 2 energetic toddlers. The boy wore a tiny suit jacket that matched his sister's dress, both impeccably coordinated. So typical of Evelyn's attention to detail. As they passed his row, one of the twins looked up and caught his eye, pointing directly at him before whispering something to his mother. Time seemed to slow as Evelyn turned her head, her expression transforming through a spectrum of emotions in mere seconds. Surprise, panic, then a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. Their eyes locked for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a heartbeat. Without missing a step, she guided the children to their seats, avoiding any further eye contact. Adrian's pulse quickened as he processed the implications of what he'd just witnessed. 3 years of wondering where things had gone wrong, of replaying their final conversations in his mind, and now this revelation that threatened to upend everything he thought he knew. The flight attendants completed their safety demonstration, but Adrian barely registered their words. His thoughts were consumed by questions that demanded answers. How could this be possible? Why hadn't she told him? And more importantly, why did these children look exactly like him? The coincidence was too perfect to be anything other than biological truth. He felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside him: anger at being kept in the dark, wonder at seeing what could be his own flesh and blood, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the years he might have missed. As the plane ascended into the night sky, Adrian found himself unable to focus on anything but the family sitting just a few rows behind him. He could hear the twins' excited chatter, their high-pitched voices carrying through the cabin despite Evelyn's attempts to quiet them. Occasionally, he caught snippets of their conversation. They were discussing clouds and stars, their innocent observations punctuated by bursts of giggles that tugged at his heartstrings. Each sound felt like a direct line to his past, to all the dreams he and Evelyn had once shared about having a family together. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, surrounded by every luxury money could buy in first class, while the children who might carry his DNA were seated in economy. The physical distance between them seemed to mirror the emotional chasm that had grown between him and Evelyn over the years. Yet despite everything, despite the bitterness of their separation and the unanswered questions hanging in the air, Adrian couldn't help but feel a profound connection to those little voices behind him. They sounded so much like how he imagined his own childhood must have been, full of wonder and curiosity about the world. His mind drifted back to the early days of his relationship with Evelyn, when they would spend hours talking about their future family. She had always wanted twins, he remembered that distinctly. They would joke about having matching outfits for them, about creating elaborate birthday parties with themes that spanned both children's interests. Now, listening to the real-life version of those dreams playing out just a few feet away, Adrian felt a pang of regret so sharp it took his breath away. All those plans, all those hopes, they had come true, just not with him. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing the twins to squeal with a mix of fear and excitement. He heard Evelyn's soothing voice calming them, explaining about air pockets and how planes were designed to handle such disturbances. Her tone was patient, loving, everything he remembered from when they were married. Adrian gripped the armrests of his seat, torn between wanting to march back there and demand answers, and the knowledge that doing so would likely cause a scene that would upset the children. Instead, he sat rigidly in his seat, every fiber of his being straining toward the family he might have had. As the flight progressed, Adrian found himself studying every detail he could observe from his position. The way Evelyn gently brushed hair from the little girl's face mirrored exactly how she used to touch him when they were intimate. The boy's habit of tapping his fingers against his knee reminded him of his own nervous tic during important business meetings. Even the way they both furrowed their brows when concentrating on their coloring books was identical to his own expression when deep in thought. Each similarity was like a punch to the gut, confirming what he already suspected but desperately needed to deny. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks. Adrian declined everything, his appetite completely gone. He watched as Evelyn accepted juice boxes for the twins, carefully inserting the straws and helping them hold the containers steady. When the older woman serving their section complimented her on how well-behaved the children were, Evelyn responded with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Adrian recognized that particular smile. It was the one she used when she was trying to maintain composure in difficult situations. He wondered how many times she'd worn that expression since their divorce, how many sleepless nights she'd spent worrying about providing for their children alone. His phone buzzed with work emails, but he ignored them, unable to focus on anything but the drama unfolding around him. The irony of his situation struck him forcefully. Here he was, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire through careful planning and strategic decisions, yet when it came to his personal life, he felt completely powerless. The control he prided himself on in business matters seemed laughable now, as he sat helpless in his leather seat, separated from what might be his family by nothing more than a few rows of economy-class seating. The longer he sat there, the more details emerged that seemed to confirm his suspicions. The way the little boy tilted his head when asking a question was exactly how Adrian had done during board meetings. The girl's habit of twirling her hair around her finger while thinking was a gesture he remembered catching himself doing during stressful negotiations. Even their laughter carried the same musical quality that people had often commented on in him. Each observation felt like another piece of evidence building an irrefutable case, yet the rational part of his mind screamed that he needed concrete proof before jumping to conclusions. Adrian's thoughts kept circling back to the night Evelyn had left. He remembered the rain pounding against their bedroom windows, the way her voice had trembled as she explained that she couldn't continue living in a marriage where they were both pretending to be happy. At the time, he'd been furious, hurt by what he perceived as her abandonment. Now, sitting on this plane, he wondered if there had been more to her decision than he'd understood. Had she known about the pregnancy then? Was that why she'd pushed for such a clean break, refusing to negotiate or discuss terms beyond the basic division of assets? The weight of his wealth suddenly felt oppressive. During their marriage, he'd often worked late hours, pouring everything into building his company while assuming Evelyn was content with their luxurious lifestyle. Looking back, he realized how little time they'd actually spent together in those final months. Had she tried to tell him something important, only to be met with his distracted responses and promises to talk later? The memory of her standing in their kitchen one evening, holding a positive pregnancy test in trembling hands, flashed through his mind. Or had that been a dream? He couldn't be sure anymore which memories were real and which were wishful thinking. His phone vibrated again, this time with a text from his current girlfriend reminding him about their dinner plans tomorrow night. The message felt surreal, disconnected from the reality of his current situation. How could he possibly think about dating someone else when the possibility of having children existed just a few rows away? The contrast between his carefully curated public life and this unexpected private revelation was staggering. All his achievements, all his financial success. None of it mattered in the face of potentially having missed out on being a father. The plane's lights dimmed as the captain announced they were approaching cruising altitude. Adrian watched as Evelyn helped the twins settle into their seats, covering them with airline blankets and tucking in their stuffed animals. The tenderness of her movements stirred something deep within him, a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He remembered how they used to talk about parenthood, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. They had agreed that love and stability were more important than material wealth, that they would prioritize family time over career advancement. Seeing Evelyn now, putting her children's comfort above everything else, made him realize how far he'd drifted from those ideals. As the twins drifted off to sleep, Adrian found himself staring at the back of Evelyn's seat, willing her to turn around. He wanted to see her face again, to search for answers in her eyes. Did she know he was sitting there? Had she planned this flight knowing he might be on it? The questions multiplied faster than he could process them. His mind kept returning to the legal documents they'd signed, the ones that had formally ended their marriage. He remembered skimming through them quickly, eager to put the painful chapter behind him. Had there been something in those papers that should have raised red flags? Something he'd missed in his haste to move on? The hours stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Adrian found himself cataloging every sound from behind him. The soft rustle of pages turning as Evelyn read to the children, the occasional sleepy murmur from one of the twins, even the gentle creak of the seat as she shifted positions. Each noise painted a picture of domestic normalcy that felt simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. He thought about all the milestones he might have missed. First steps, first words, birthdays celebrated with cake and candles. The weight of those absent moments pressed heavily on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. Despite his wealth and success, Adrian had always considered himself a practical man. He believed in facts, in evidence-based decisions. Yet here he was, basing his entire emotional upheaval on circumstantial evidence and physical resemblances. The businessman in him knew he needed proof, documentation, something concrete to support his growing certainty. But the human part of him, the part that had loved Evelyn deeply and had dreamed of building a family with her, refused to accept anything less than the truth that seemed to be staring him in the face. The flight attendants began their meal service, bringing with them the smell of warmed-up airplane food. Adrian declined again, his stomach still churning with anxiety and anticipation. He watched as Evelyn accepted meals for herself and the children, efficiently cutting up their food and encouraging them to eat before settling back to sleep. Her efficiency reminded him of how she used to manage their household, always staying one step ahead of potential problems, anticipating needs before they arose. It occurred to him that she must have developed incredible strength over the past 3 years, raising twins on her own while maintaining the grace and poise she'd always possessed. As the meal trays were collected and the cabin lights dimmed further, Adrian found himself fighting back tears. Not tears of sadness, but of frustration. At himself for not seeing the signs earlier, at Evelyn for keeping this from him, at the universe for presenting him with this cruel twist of fate. He had spent years building walls around his heart after their divorce, convincing himself that he didn't need anyone. Now those walls were crumbling under the weight of what might have been, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced since his earliest days of entrepreneurship. The plane's gentle rocking became almost hypnotic as Adrian wrestled with his thoughts. Part of him wanted to march back there right now, to demand answers and confront Evelyn about the children. Another part, the more rational part, knew that would be disastrous. The last thing he wanted was to create a scene that might traumatize the twins or embarrass Evelyn in front of other passengers. Yet the tension of waiting, of knowing that answers were so close yet still out of reach, was becoming almost unbearable. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to act, to do something, while his logical mind urged caution and patience. He found himself mentally composing speeches, practicing different approaches to broaching the subject with Evelyn. Should he start with anger, demanding to know why she'd kept this from him? Or would compassion be more effective, expressing his shock and desire to understand the situation better? Perhaps a neutral approach would work best, simply stating what he'd observed and asking for clarification. The problem was, he couldn't predict how Evelyn might react. Would she deny everything? Confirm his suspicions? Or would she simply shut down, refusing to engage at all? The darkness outside the window seemed to mirror the turmoil within him. City lights occasionally illuminated the clouds below, creating patterns that danced across the glass like fleeting opportunities slipping through his fingers. Adrian realized that this moment represented a crossroads in his life, a chance to reclaim something he thought he'd lost forever, or to walk away and preserve whatever dignity remained from his shattered marriage. Either choice promised pain and uncertainty, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt increasingly impossible. As the flight continued its journey westward, Adrian became acutely aware of every movement from behind him. The subtle shift of Evelyn adjusting the children's blankets, the soft sighs of their breathing as they slept, even the occasional rustle of paper as she presumably read or worked on something. Each sound created a tapestry of domestic intimacy that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He found himself timing his own movements to coincide with natural breaks in the cabin's rhythm, hoping to catch glimpses of the family without appearing obvious about his interest. The realization dawned on him that this situation transcended mere curiosity or wounded pride. These weren't just children who resembled him. They represented a fundamental challenge to everything he thought he knew about his past 3 years. Their existence suggested that Evelyn had been carrying secrets far deeper than he'd imagined, that their divorce might have been based on information he hadn't possessed. The implications extended beyond personal relationships into questions of trust, honesty, and the very nature of their separation agreement. Adrian's mind kept returning to their final conversation, searching for clues he might have missed. He remembered Evelyn's unusual calmness that day, how she had seemed almost relieved rather than devastated by their impending separation. At the time, he'd interpreted it as cold indifference, proof that their marriage had truly run its course. Now he wondered if her composure had stemmed from something else entirely. Perhaps the knowledge that she was carrying his children, that their lives were about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, making him question every assumption he'd made about their breakup. The flight attendants began their descent preparations, signaling that their journey was nearing its end. Adrian felt a surge of panic at the thought of losing sight of Evelyn and the twins once they landed. In the controlled environment of the airplane, he'd been able to maintain some semblance of surveillance, however distant. Once they disembarked, she could disappear into the crowd at LAX, taking with her the answers he so desperately needed. The idea of returning to his penthouse apartment, alone with his thoughts and unanswered questions, felt intolerable. He began mentally mapping out scenarios for intercepting Evelyn after landing. The logical part of his brain warned against rushing into confrontation, suggesting instead that he follow them discreetly, perhaps noting their destination or license plate number. Yet the emotional tide threatening to overwhelm him argued for immediate action, for seizing this opportunity while it presented itself. The conflict between these impulses created a tension that made his muscles ache and his temples throb with stress. As the plane descended through the clouds, revealing the twinkling lights of Los Angeles below, Adrian realized that this moment marked more than just the end of a flight. It represented a threshold between the life he'd constructed after his divorce and the potential beginning of something entirely new. Or perhaps something that had been waiting for him all along, hidden in plain sight. The city spread out beneath him like a canvas of possibilities, each light representing a different path his life could take from this point forward. The landing gear engaged with a familiar whine, and Adrian felt his heart rate increase with each passing second. He watched as Evelyn began waking the twins, helping them gather their belongings and prepare for disembarkment. The efficiency of her movements spoke of experience, of countless similar routines performed over the past 3 years. He found himself memorizing every detail. The way she smoothed the little girl's hair, how she double-checked that both children had their shoes securely fastened, the protective hand she kept on each of their shoulders as they stood in the aisle. As the plane taxied to the gate, Adrian's mind raced through possibilities. Should he approach her immediately upon deplaning? Wait until they were in the terminal? Or perhaps arrange for a more formal meeting later, giving both of them time to process this encounter? The uncertainty of the situation was maddening, yet he knew that whatever decision he made in the next few minutes could alter the course of his life forever.